last week that grace is a quality which originates from the heart of God. It is a quality which is found in God's heart.
So I am found in God's heart.
Grace is God's, put it this way, grace is God's disposition towards the undeserving to give them salvation, to bless them, to uplift them, to exalt them. It's God's heart. It's God's natural disposition to love the unlovable, to love the undeserving, to do for the undeserving. So grace is something which emanates from the heart of God to fallen mankind. Right? Being justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. So we showed last week that God is the source of grace. We showed that Christ is the what? The way.
It is demonstrated.
The way in which grace comes to us. It is God's method. Christ. So notice, it is God's way of giving grace to the sinner. Jesus Christ. When He says, I am the way, that statement has very wide implications.
I am the way.
Not just the way to the Father. He said, no man comes to the Father but by me. But nothing comes through the Father to us but by Him.
Amen.
Everybody see that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. What is it? John 6 verse, whatever.
14:6.
14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. He says that, right?
Yes.
And we're seeing there a channeling from us going through Him to the Father. Just basically, put it that way, into glory. Is Christ is the only gate, the only door, right? But as the way, He's also the way for two-way communication.
Of course.
Because nothing comes from the Father except through Him.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So Christ is God's way of grace. It is God's method or God's way of giving grace of giving grace to the sinner. And by the way, I want us to understand it. When I say God, I use God
As a plural.
in its plurality. When I say God, I don't mean God exclusive of Jesus Christ. I'm talking about the Godhead. You understand? Everybody's what I'm trying to say. Because the plan of salvation was a plan which was entered upon by the Godhead, by the divine counsel of the universe for man. And on that counsel, you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? Now, grace emanates from God to man. Christ is the chosen vessel through whom grace comes to us. So it says, being justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. It's only found in Christ Jesus. And we're going to look at grace a little bit more. And it says, whom is Christ, God has set forth to be a propitiation through faith in His blood, to be a covering, the one through whom mercy is shown to us, through Jesus Christ. And I think it was Luther, 16th century reformer, who shows through his writings that that word propitiation also actually means also, literally translate also the mercy seat. So Christ is our mercy seat. You know, through faith in His blood, to be a propitiation through faith in His blood. So notice that propitiation, that covering, that justifying righteousness by which He enshrouds us and protects us, comes through Christ, right? But it says He is a propitiation through faith in His blood. What is the role of faith right here? Does faith play a role in saving us too then?
Yes. Because you have to believe that.
Think about the question.
The hand that grasps you.
Alright. Does faith play a role in saving us?
But it has to.
Faith is the means by which we appropriate the blessing. Faith is the condition of receiving it. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Without faith, it is impossible to personally receive and experience that salvation.
Amen.
So faith does not make, it takes. Everybody see that? Think about it.
Yeah.
Faith does not make, it takes.
Yeah. It takes.
Faith receives.
Yeah.
Wow.
As you know, faith is the hand that grasps the blessing.
Yeah.
See that?
Yeah.
I'm using this kind of graphic imagery to sink these things in our mind.
It's there.
Picture that.
And you're like, I believe.
And by the way, the very faith that grasps the blessing, by which we appropriate the blessing, it too is a gift of God. through the Spirit, right? So we see here, but faith is a gift of God through the Romans 12 tells us that. The Spirit gives through the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. So we see here the Godhead involved in the plan of salvation. And that's what Paul is basically telling us in the book of Romans. That look, Adam messed us up and all have sinned and come short. And by the way, that Romans 6:3-23, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. In the original language, it's actually written in the present continuous tense. Not only come short, but keep falling short. In other words, it's not just dealing with no, but as long as man is on this earth, in this state, before Christ comes and takes reaps his harvest, we will all be, in other words, none of us will be able to produce justifying righteousness. Justifying righteousness only comes through faith in Jesus Christ. Faith is what we use to take hold of it and say, this is mine.
He says, this is a gift. The gift is here. But the gift will remain here unless you take it.
Faith is the hand that grasps the blessing.
Faith
All right.
is the stuff that stops you from falling.
All right. So notice now.
Yeah, it's what stops you from going down and down to nothing.
And that makes it, by the way, makes us understand clearly why Paul asks the question he does at the beginning of verse 27. He says, where is boasting then?
You have nothing to
Who has anything to boast about?
There's
You
nothing.
didn't do it. You contributed nothing. He said boasting is excluded. By what law? By the law of works? No, because the law of works would give you reason to boast. Because if works could contribute in any way, by all means, you would have, we see in chapter 4, he said, look, if Abraham was justified by works, he would have something to glory in, but not before God. He wouldn't give God the credit. Romans 4, right? This man didn't find a dime last week. Somebody was here last week. So Paul says in verse 27, so where is boasting then? It is excluded. By what law? By the law of works? No, by the law of faith. Works would give you reason to boast, right, Ramos? If our works could do something towards saving us. But it is excluded by the law of faith. In other words, faith, the law of faith says that, look, you can only receive as a gift what God has done. And all you have to do, faith is receiving. It's law of faith says you can only receive. It's a gift, it's free. So that eliminates any possibility of boasting. That's why it is excluded by the law of faith. Right? Terence, you with us? Alright, Ramos clear? And Paul says here, nay, but by the law of faith. Those two words, the law here, you can also use them interchangeably with the word principle. The principle of faith eliminates all boasting. Because the fact that it can only be received by accepting it through faith means that it's a gift, which means you did nothing to earn it, you did nothing to contribute to it. It eliminates all boasting. So the principle of faith eliminates all boasting. Go ahead, sure.
Because I was just running it over in my head, and wherever we are when we hear that message for the first time, and it really sinks in, that is the time when the Holy Spirit gets to you. Where you start for a minute and you actually listen, and He gets to you and He says, "Listen, this is what it is." You understand? And it's like the light is shed on your darkness.
You draw bricks, right?
Yeah, you draw bricks. Like your eyes open. Your eyes open. So it really, it has nothing to do with you. You're walking along blindly, and He comes and He sheds the light on you. And the only thing you can do is either turn away from it, or you reach out and say, and you believe and accept. Because it really has nothing to do with you.
Exactly. And we're going to see, quite often you hear the saying, say, we have nothing to do, we have nothing to do. And the statement is very true, but everything needs to be found in its very proper context, right? Because when we get to chapter 6, we're going to see what we have to do, but we're going to see that it has no place in saving. It is just what we've been saying all along. Chapter 6 deals with sanctification and the Christian walk. It is fruit all the way. Chapter 4, Paul is dealing with faith, righteous by faith. So when you look at it, in chapter 4, which we're going to transition to shortly, we see that Paul is coming against the legalists, those who were trusting in their obedience. In chapter 6, he's coming against the antinomians, those who said, okay, so Christ did it all, so we have nothing to do. You understand? Yeah, Christ did it all, yes. And we have nothing to do by way of salvation in terms of saving ourselves. But understand that when it's usually said, when people say Christ did it all, so we have nothing to do, that's not what you're thinking. Typically, you're thinking, they have a perverted thinking to it. They're actually saying, okay, Christ did it all, so that gives us a license to do whatever we want. But understand, when, as we've kept, these some things you cannot say enough, you have to re-emphasize, because we deal with the core of the gospel. Christ has done it all, yes. And he wants you to accept it as a free gift. But know that when you accept it, it doesn't leave you in the same place. It works you. So, exactly. He says, I give you rest, but that rest is not inactivity. You're working. But your working is not to earn, your working is, in essence, an expression of thanks. Your obedience, a thank offering. I was. Notice now. Paul says, another point, we jumped over. Verse 26. Paul says, we looked at verse 25 last week and we showed that the sins that our past had to do with all that was leading up to the cross. Because Satan was there challenging. So how is it that without the shedding of blood there is no remission of sins? Look, you took Elijah up into heaven. You took Enoch up into heaven. And how come no blood has been shed?
Oh yeah. The blood was shed by the Lamb.
It hadn't been done yet at that point. But God knew on the basis of his foreknowledge, one, and on the basis of his knowledge of the certainty of his word, that his word cannot come back to him void. He knew that that efficacious sacrifice would ultimately be made. That blood would be shed. You understand? And that blood is efficacious, goes all the way back and covers from Adam all the way down. So in other words, it says here, verse 25, whom God has set forth to be a propitiation through faith in his blood, to declare his righteousness for the remission of sins that are past, through the forbearance of God. God was forbearing all the time. And he was forgiving sins. It was genuine forgiveness that, you know that all forgiveness is based on the shed blood of Jesus Christ, right? That is what God gives God both legal and moral right to forgive sins. The shed blood of Jesus Christ. But God was forgiving sins before that blood was shed, you know that? And he didn't take Enoch into heaven or Elijah with unforgiven sins, right? Or Moses with unforgiven sins, right? But it was through the forbearance of God. God, it was see, and that word, if you look at it in the margin, it says the forbearance here, the word forbearance here, it says, remission, remission, it says passing over. It would appear that God was passing over these men's sins. And Satan was there fighting himself, making a lot of noise. Say, look at this, how come you're taking much? Where's the blood? Where's the lamb that you said go mislead?
And that's why he worked on Jesus so hard.
And he knew it all had to do with that. So guess what happened? No, when the lamb was slain, the blood was shed. He said, no, God can't see, I told you it would be. So that's silence from at one point there. So God is now able to you see, God is, because on the basis of that shed blood, God is able to declare us righteous. Justification is a declaration of righteousness.
Okay, thank you. Question answer.
And the question, understand this. We're looking at one of the key areas in which many in Adventism are messed up and are actually preaching Catholicism. The Catholics have a doctrine called the doctrine of infused grace that Vernon used to believe in at one time. I'm just kidding. Well, we all used it somewhere there. Maybe not in those words or whatever, but no, many of us have been indoctrinating in a system, in which that okay, God pours out His Spirit in you. You become born again, and when you're born again, you can do good works, and you're saved on the basis of those good works that you do by His Spirit working in you.
Yes, that was what we were taught.
That is Catholicism.
We thought that was the sanctification.
Because that was what no, that's what sanctification is, but it doesn't save you. That's where you go wrong when you say you think that you will be saved on the basis of it. God pours out His Spirit in the born again believers, and He works in them to transform their heart. That is sanctification. Yes. But it doesn't contribute to your salvation. What Catholicism teaches is that when you're renewed by the Spirit, you're born again, or you receive the Spirit, He infuses His grace in you, and by virtue of that reception of grace or the Spirit that you receive, you are now able to obey in order to be accepted by God.
That's such a terrible thing, because when you mess up, you feel like, okay,
it leads you to despair when you realize that our salvation must be anchored in something that's unchanging, something that's complete, something that's accomplished. You cannot you cannot experience genuine restfulness in this time of trouble and trial if your assurance of salvation is based upon something that's incomplete, imperfect, and really is a work in progress. If you are trusting in your sanctification, every day you look at yourself, you're reminded that, look, I'm not trusting in anything. You understand? The only way you can experience rest is by taking your assurance of salvation, your whole trust and dependence for salvation, taking it away from anything that's being worked out in you, even by the Spirit of God, even what God is working out in your life. Taking your hope and your trust from that and fixing it on the righteousness of Christ. Because what's happening in you is an incomplete work, it's an ongoing experience, and constantly being reminded that, look, it's an incomplete work. And look, you can only enjoy rest while you're being sanctified. You can only enjoy rest when your assurance is not based on what? You know those two works that we mentioned earlier? God's work in Christ for us and God's work in us by the Holy Spirit. You can only enjoy genuine rest while you're growing in grace when your assurance is not based on number two, but on number one.
Because so many times, Elder, that I feel so, like I say, I feel so low at the bottom of the ladder that I say I cannot make it, because I do not see the manifestation of the work of the Holy Spirit in me, and because I don't see that work, it sometimes it puts me into such a depression, forgetting that it is not the work that the Holy Spirit is doing in me that is going to save me or save me, but it is the work that God has done through Christ, to which I must hold on to. Yeah. And by holding on to and resting in that and believing in that, and do not allow the cares of what is happening around to agitate me then, and to cause me to lose my focus. Because if I do that, I will ever say, oh, what wretched man I am.
You'll have no peace. And I can tell you one thing, there are many people in Adventists in North today have no peace. Yeah. Many are ready to, just don't hang yourself, whatever you do. In despair because of a Christless gospel. I mean, people who are being subtly, maybe not even willfully or deliberately, but subtly taught to look to their own works, their own doings.
That is a self
Exactly. I understand. Sanctification is to break the power of self, break the power of sin, which is selfishness at the root of it. So, now, point we want to mention here also is this, right? That I want to emphasize. Notice what it says in verse 26 again. It says 25 that God declares us righteous, right? Justified by declaring us righteous. And verse 26 says, he repeats it. He says, to declare, I say, at this time, his righteousness. That God might be just and the justifier of him who believes in Jesus. So in other words, sanctification is a declaration of righteousness. What a judge does. A judge, notice, justification. Just look at the words, and we can see that they all derive from one common root. Judge, justice, judiciary, justified, judgment, justification. You see the relationship with all those words? Justification is a word that has to do with the law courts. It's a legal word, right? And the gospel is presented by Paul in the Old Testament in that way. We can see another time in the Old Testament. We see, but in Romans, Paul presents the gospel so much. You see remission, you see ransom, propitiation, justification. A lot of these words are legal words when you really look at it. Now, what does a judge do in a legal setting? Does a judge condemn the criminal by saying, okay, does the judge make the criminal guilty? No. He just declares the state of things as they are. He looks at the evidence and he says, well, based on the evidence, it shows that you're guilty. It is not the judge giving the verdict that makes him guilty. The verdict is just a confirmation of what the evidence already points to. Right? So what the judge really doesn't give you the verdict, he just declares, well, yeah. The judge gives a declaration of it, right? When God looks upon you and he sees that righteousness of Christ covering you, when he looks upon you and he sees that faith in that cross, that faith in that blood of Jesus Christ, he declares you righteous. Why? Because he sees you now covered with the righteousness of Christ. The moment you believe in Jesus Christ, you are justified. The moment you give your heart to him completely, his righteousness is imputed to you right there and then instantaneously. And God sees you as clothed in the righteousness of Jesus Christ. Your standing in the records of heaven is instantly changed from condemned to justified. And God declares it so. Justification, understand. One of the things that were at the heart of the Reformation conflict with the Catholic, with the Rome, was this, and to this very day, the meaning of justification. Justification is not a making righteous, it is a declaring righteous. It's a declaration of righteousness. Sanctification is the making you righteous. The making flows from you being declared righteous. Just like how the fruit flows from being justified, the fruit of sanctification naturally flows, right? In other words, look, understand. Get me and make again. Justification is not a making righteous in terms of a subjective experience. It's a declaration of righteousness. No, God doesn't lie. God says you're righteous. It means you're as righteous as he is. Do you know that? You're as righteous as he is. Because he imputes his righteousness to you, which was demonstrated in Jesus Christ. He imputes that to you. You're covered with that. And God declares you righteous. But guess what? When you are... Let me make that point, I'm going to take a point forward. When God declares you righteous, you are justified. You receive Christ, right? You're born again. You know at that point when you're born again, you have received Christ, right? You're now entered into him, you're abiding in him, and he's abiding in you. When you have Christ, do you only have a part of him or do you have all of him? All. So when you have Christ and you receive that justification, that declaration of righteousness by being covered with his robe of righteousness, at the point of justification, many people don't really understand it, but listen to this. You also receive the gift of sanctification at that point. But guess what? It unfolds progressively as you live your Christian life. You don't just, a lot of people believe that you receive justification and then you start to receive sanctification after that point. No, when you receive Christ, you receive him in his fullness and all that's in. You receive justification, you receive sanctification. And as you continue to abide in him, that gift in the capsule, in the seed, that gift, you know, like the acorn, the whole oak tree you can say was in that acorn, right? And as that acorn abides in the ground and germinates, it starts to unfold and develop into a huge acorn is being revealed from that seed, right? As you remain abiding in him, that gift of sanctification which you received the moment you gave yourself to him, and he gave himself to you, is progressively unfolding. So sanctification is the progressive revelation of Christ's righteousness in your experience. It's an unfolding. It's Bible calls it on many ways growing in grace. You understand? So it's not like God is putting something new in you. He put it all in you when you accept him. One part is forensic. One part changes your standing before God. You're justified. You move from condemnation to pardon, justification. And then the other part is progressively unfolding and being revealed in you as you grow in grace. Like a flower opening up, unfolding. And it is directly proportional. Notice now, it's directly in proportion to your surrender. The more you surrender, the more you're giving it room to unfold. The more you die, you know, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:34, I die daily. The more you die, the more that life is revealed in you. unto rightness, unto full sanctification.
So when I so when I am justified, and being justified then is like I feel that I can do anything that I want because I'm justified. And I am still, the work of sanctification is not yet complete in me. So I can do anything that I want.
No, that's a counterfeit of sanctification. That's
His
presumptuousness.
His servant we are.
Yes.
Exactly.
You know, I am not careful in what I do because God saved me and He's still saving me.
Exactly.
If you accept that justification, you can't think like that. No.
That's just the flesh speaking. Exactly.
Yes.
Did Paul talk about that?
That's what the flesh leads.
Do we sin because that more grace may abound?
Yeah, we're going to look at that in Romans chapter 5. We touched on it a few weeks ago, earlier in chapter 3. You know, but it said where sin does abound, grace does much more abound.
Yeah.
But yes, and it is not where the work of justification, the work of sanctification is taking place. To me, my understanding of that is that because you are so far in sin, or you regard yourself as so deep in sin, that you might think that grace cannot reach you there. But the power of grace is so great to reach you there.
Exactly.
You define sanctification the way you just did.
Or define sanctification?
Yeah, the way you did.
I defined it earlier when I said it's the breaking of the power of sin in the mind.
Yeah, but you made a difference.
Well, I've done so many ways. I wonder what way did I just say it a while ago? Oh, you mean the progressive unfolding of the life of Christ, or you can call it the progressive manifestation of the life of Christ in the believer. In the believer. You see that? So it's like the seed just turning into an acorn, for day by day growing bigger and bigger and bigger. The life of Christ is being revealed more and more in the believer as they die daily.
You continue to focus on them. Then what is happening?
So yeah, exactly. A good point, Brother Wilson. That is basically what 2 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 18 is telling us. It says, "We beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord are being changed."
What happened to the
3:18. He say are being changed. He say are changed, but it's actually that also is written in continuous. It are being changed into the same image, from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord. What did I say the second work was? God's work in us by His Holy Spirit. That is it. All right. And you see that it's a progressive unfolding. Alright? Now, we're not going to get to Romans chapter 4 tonight.
It's too sweet.
It's too sweet. Let's go on midnight, we can, but we're going to wrap up again. We're going to just reinforce with chapter 3. Come through almost at the end of chapter 3. Reinforce again then. And then next week we'll launch out. We'll begin at chapter 4, right? We spent about a month on chapter 3. That's about okay, right, Ramos? Still not enough time. There's so much that we miss. You know. Anyway, let's go forward. So Paul says, look, let's pick up again chapter. So we've seen the declaration part. We've seen the remission of sins that are past. Says no, 26 says, so that. So God declares His righteousness. And verse 21 and 22 show us that righteousness revealed is Jesus Christ, right? But now the righteousness of God is revealed, right? We saw that, verse 21 and 22. So God declares that righteousness now upon the believer. And He says, so that God may be just and the justifier of him who believes. So in other words, without having accomplished this righteousness, if God did not work out this righteousness in Jesus Christ, if Christ did not come and live a law of perfect obedience to the law of God, and went into the second death, culminating His earthly ministry by going into the second death and working out that perfect righteousness in His earthly ministry, right? If God did not do that, He would not be just and the justifier. Even if He tried to be just to justify mankind, it would be a false justification. It would be based on compromise. God had to be just to his law
Yeah.
in order to be the justifier of mankind. Because if God had tried to save man, sweep things under the rug, save man without giving, in Jesus Christ, giving perfect obedience to his law and dying the second death, because remember these two things were against man, right? The law was broken. And it was man who needed to provide that perfect obedience. You understand? In other words, and it was man who was supposed to die the second death. So in order for God to produce this righteousness, which he can give to us, in order to give it to us, to justify us and sanctify us, right? In order for him to do it, it had to be produced in man. See that? So God had to become man. It would have been an unrighteous transaction if he became an angel and did it, or he something else and did it. He had become man. But not just only become man, he had to become man as man was. He had to become man as man is, that needed saving. Do we see that? He could not become man as Adam was before Adam sinned. You know why? Because after Adam sinned, that man which did not have a sinful nature, that man who had a sinless nature, could no longer be found in the universe. Never existed again. Understand that, right? Sinless human nature did not exist. The moment we needed a savior, sinless human nature did not exist. And God had to meet us where we are and to give to the law what we needed to give to it, but couldn't. He had to become where we are. He had to take on our fallen nature, our sinful nature, and in that sinful nature, God had to wrought out that perfect righteousness of God through a man, the God-man, Jesus Christ. Christ is humanity embodied right here, and in him, perfect righteousness, and then the death, the second death, which was that condemnation of the second death, which was hanging over our heads. That man had to also do that, so that God can turn around and give it to man. Because it was man that needed help.
So is death plus the death.
Second death. Yeah, exactly. And what we're going to do next week, we're probably going to go to chapter 4 next week, or on the basis of this, we might have to, maybe we do it when we get to chapter 5. Look at the doctrine of substitution. It's something that we need to understand. The doctrine of substitution. How it is that God, the Bible tells us that righteousness cannot be transferred, right? And sin cannot be transferred. The soul that sinneth, it shall die, not another. The one that sinneth, right? Did Jesus sin? No. He died though. Well, did God compromise his principles?
No.
Bible says, though Noah, Job, and Daniel, or whatever were in the land, their righteousness cannot save anyone, not even son nor daughter. Their righteousness can only save themselves. You know, God is telling us that righteousness cannot be transferred from one to another. So how is it that God could get the soul that sinned to die? How is it that God could get a soul that never sinned to die and still transfer the righteousness to? Do you know that in Muslim religion, that's one of the things they have against Christianity? They say you all teach you all a false theology. You all teach an injustice. You all talk about an innocent man who Christianity is not fair. An innocent man who did nothing died for you all. They don't understand. So what we're going to look at another time is the doctrine of substitution. How could God do this and at the same time not compromise his principles that he laid out in the Word?
Are you going to show us how we were in Christ?
We're going to do the doctrine of substitution. We're going to see how it all comes together in that. Brother Wilson.
Just one question. Did the record show that all Noah's children was righteous?
If the record showed that all Noah's children was righteous, no. No, they did some terrible things.
Before the flood.
Before the flood.
Were they saved in the ark because they were righteous?
Well, what would cause them to go into the ark?
They believe.
They believe. Faith. Faith.
So,
And faith does what? receives God's imputed righteousness.
Okay.
You understand? It doesn't mean that they can turn around and shun it later on. But I think one of them eventually within 2-3 generations after Noah, they were building the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
But you see what I'm saying? Now, let's wrap up the chapter 3. Somebody had their hand up. Ramon had their hand up. Let's wrap up chapter 3. No. As we said, God produced the righteousness in order to justify us. Right? But in order for God produced a righteousness in Christ by which to justify us, right? But in order for that righteousness to be transferable, it had to be produced, it had to be worked out in a human being. In man, because man was the one that needed help. Right? Now, Paul goes on now. Paul says, where is boasting then? It is excluded. By what law? Of works? No, but of the law of faith. You know that already. Therefore, we conclude. I love the way Paul writes. Paul builds his argument, builds up the temple,
Like a lawyer.
and then he concludes. And he builds. No, Paul was a brilliant. Paul was a lawyer. You know. Paul was a member of the Sanhedrin Council. The Sanhedrin was the religious and legal body that governed over Israel.
Wow.
So Paul was a lawyer.
You do that again.
Me? No, I'm not a lawyer.
You talk like
Yeah, I see that in your writing, you're presenting to. That's nice. That's
Holy
build up.
Spirit.
Let's talk about Paul. Let's talk about somebody who really knows what he's doing. Let's talk about Paul. Alright. So notice, notice what Paul says. Therefore, we conclude. You know what he does? He builds, and then he just makes that point that says, bam, it's like he nailed it down.
Yes.
You can't get away from it.
Yes.
And then he builds it again, he nails it. You can't get away from it. We conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law. Why did he tell us this in Romans chapter 3:20? By the works of the law, no flesh shall be justified. And he comes back again and reinforces it in verse 28. Because Paul knew that the church in Rome was full of Jews who had, Jews of the diaspora who had, they were living in Jerusalem. They had moved to other cities, pagan, heathen cities, and they had established themselves. But they heard the gospel, many of them accepted the gospel. But they still were tied and linked to a very large extent to their forms and rituals and customs, ceremonialism. And not that anything was wrong with that, but they were trusting in it for their salvation. And they were so strongly entrenched in that dependence on their works that Paul is nailing. Paul is saying, we are justified by faith without the deeds of the law. In other words, you have no advantage over the Jew, over the Gentile who has accepted Jesus Christ by faith. Just the fact that you're circumcised, and the fact that you are doing all these little things, little ceremonies and little things, you are not, it's not like you're twisting God's arm behind his back. So he's going to say, ouch, I'll give you whatever you want. It's not like you are making yourself more acceptable to God by these works. Paul is really saying, these do not contribute to your acceptance. In Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 6, he tells us we are accepted in the beloved. So acceptance is fully in Jesus Christ because of his work. And so verse 29, he says, is he the God of the Jews only? Is he not also of the Gentiles? Yes, of the Gentiles also. Right? Seeing, verse 30, it is how many? One God, which shall justify the circumcision. Who are those? The Jews. How? By faith. And the uncircumcision through faith. The Gentiles. So let's pause right here. The popular Christian world has a thing that says, the Jews are saved by Jews are saved by keeping the law. Now we Gentiles we're saved by faith. You ever heard that? We're saved by grace through faith. But Paul makes it clear that both Jews and Gentiles are justified through faith.
Abraham.
Exactly. And that's what chapter 4 comes out powerfully with. Through faith, right? So that knocks that foolishness out of the water. God has one plan of salvation. Nowhere in the Bible you speak of the plans of salvation. One plan of salvation for all Jews and Gentiles. And by the way, when Gentiles come into that plan of salvation, they become Jews. And guess what? When biological Jews, when ethnic Jews reject that plan of salvation, they're Gentiles, you know that. Alright, good. We saw it in chapter 2. No, Paul is saying, no, understand now, just to see how he makes the point in verse 31 now. Paul said, no, I'm here saying, this is what Paul is saying. I'm here preaching to you and telling you that it's all by faith, by the works of the law, no flesh shall be justified. Now, it is the natural tendency, or especially, the natural mind to think that, well, if no, by the works of the law, no flesh shall be justified. So why bother with the law? Let's get rid of it then. It don't serve any purpose. That's what the natural person thinks, right? And Paul recognizes that this flesh is prone to think that way. So Paul says, look, am I saying that the law serves no purpose? Is it that I'm abolishing the law? And how does he say? He says, do we then make void the law through faith? In other words, because of this message of justification by faith that I'm preaching, which is laying it down clearly, irrefutably, that we are saved only by faith in the work of Jesus Christ. Does it mean? And I'm also emphasizing that by our own works, law keeping, whatever, we cannot be justified. Is it that I'm abolishing the law? That's what he's basically saying. Do we then make void the law through faith? And he said, no, quite the opposite. We establish the law. Paul is saying, look, the message of justification by faith, contrary to what the popular world wants to think or like to delude themselves in thinking that it's abolishing the law, it actually establishes the law. The question is how?
Because if it had it not been for the law, then there would have been no sin. And had it been, if there were no sin, then there would be no need for Jesus to have come.
All right, good point, good point. Had there been no sin, there would have been no need, but you need to zero it in a little bit more than that too, but...
No, I'm saying that. If there was no law to be broken, it was because of the law of God that was broken by man that resulted in the death of Jesus. But in the same breath, or in the same sense, we are saying that it is not because of the keeping of the law that you will be saved eventually. It is because of what God has done in Jesus. Because
you're right. But what I want to tie in with, how is it that establishes the law?
It shows them that the law is necessary. It cannot be eradicated.
Good point. Good point. Brother Wilson.
The law.
Yes.
I am under sin. Okay, I'm under sin. What the law does for me, I look at the law and it's a mirror, the Bible says. And you look at it and you find out that, wow, I can't compare with this because that's not the way I'm living. But in other words, the law will point you to Jesus, the perfect life.
But we're looking at this point that he made. We establish the law. This gospel that I'm preaching, Paul is saying, it might sound to you that I'm doing away with the law, but I'm actually establishing the law.
I am actually making it of great importance.
All right. That's good.
To the death of Christ.
If it could have
Go ahead,
been
Raquel.
changed, Jesus wouldn't have had to die.
That is the point I'm looking for, to cement everything. And we're going to elaborate on this a little bit. Go ahead, Ramos. Mr. Mario was there, right there, there. But basically, it concises into that one point. We're going to see how it establishes after we define establish.
The law is a schoolmaster. It points out, it points to Christ. The law is a schoolmaster. It points to Christ. It establishes character.
That is true, but not the point that we're looking for. Look here, let me show you something. Supposing, alright, marriage license with a state, right? And you do your state exam, and say every year 10,000 people do the exam, right? And 7,000 people pass. Would you say that's an exclusive elite group?
No.
You probably think that if you did 9,000, you probably think that the exam is easy.
Yeah.
But supposing you do the exam and only 5 people pass out of 10,000 every year, right?
Wow.
That puts that examination or that state qualifying thing, it puts it on a pedestal where it's only a very minute elite group, the creme de la creme, the cream of the crop, right? Can reach a very select group, right? No, supposing every year 10,000 people did that, and only 2 people pass every year. That makes it even more exclusive, right? Now, understand. There was a test, right? When Adam sinned, right? Placed billions and billions and billions, even down to this day, in a situation where, in order for them to be redeemed and to avoid the second death, they would have to pass a test. Only one man passed it. Only one passed it. And there have been billions and billions and hundreds of billions over the years. What does it say about the test? It means that the points of that test are exalted outside of the realm of human accomplishment. Since Adam sinned. Since Adam sinned, you understand? The points of that test are outside of the realm of any human accomplishment or human achievement. Now, understand, if God could, you know that every pang of suffering that goes through happening all through there, God feels it. You know that? For example, in Isaiah 63:9, concerning the Jews, the punishment that they bring upon themselves, in all their afflictions, he was afflicted. In all their afflictions, he was afflicted, right? And we're told again in, I think it's just the correct, that not even a sparrow falls to the ground which does not the heart of God. Every pain God feels it. God is no respecter of persons. If he was feeling their suffering, he's feeling ours too. But guess what? God foresaw that in order to redeem man, he would have to subject himself to that. He would feel all the suffering of sin. He saw the suffering of Jesus Christ. He saw the condescension of Jesus Christ. Knowing that it would be an eternal condescension in terms of taking on humanity on himself, right? And all that. And God had the power, if he wanted, to blot out the memory of sin miraculously with his divine power, right? Out of all the minds of his creatures, and just save us. He could do that, but that would have been unrighteousness. You know that, right? He could have, in other words, he could have said, church, I'm not going to bother send my son. I would not going to bother send my son to go through all that, and then he's going to be in that state of having taken on humanity, even though now he's in glorified humanity. He's going to be in that state eternally. I'm not going to bother go through subject myself to all that. I like the way my divine Godhead has been all through eternity. He could have said that. So I'm just going to miraculously, with my power, I love man, I don't want him to die. I want to give him a second chance. Just cleanse them, redeem them, and take them back to myself. And just forget that the law was broken. Right? You know that God had the power to do that, but he doesn't have the nature to do that, because God is righteous in all his ways and holy in all his works. Psalm 45:17. So for God to have done that would have been unrighteousness. But guess what? He would have abolished the foundation of his own government. Because guess what? If he had ignored the law, it means that he would have abolished his law. He would have sent a message to the universe that the law is not indispensable. It's not essential. He would have abolished his law. But in seeing all of that, God himself was manifested in the flesh. Came, subjected himself to everything that Satan could give to throw on him. And he manifested a perfect righteousness in order to give him the legal right and the moral right to do what he wanted to do, redeem mankind.
Amen.
He could not do it without giving the law its due. Put it that way.
That means time.
So Paul is saying that, first of all, Paul is saying, in order for any of us to enter into glory, we have to accept that perfect obedience to the law which Christ gave. And it's all by faith. You accept it by faith, And then when you accept it by faith, he works it out in your life, right? He works it out through you, to do it, right? Paul is saying, like, none of us were able to produce it. All of us have to receive it as a free gift through faith. So, by our works, we cannot accomplish it. By our own works, we cannot justify it. We justify ourselves. We have to get it as a free gift through Jesus Christ by faith. And that is what Paul has been preaching all along. And now he's saying, by the way, the fact that I'm telling you by your works you can't do it, it does not do away with the law. What I'm telling you, it actually establishes the law, because it shows that only one man could produce the righteousness which the law demands. And in order for God to give you justification, to give you salvation, he had to give the law its due. So the law is unchangeable, it's immutable. Paul is saying, look, method of justification by faith. Many people out there say it gets rid of the law. Paul says it establishes the law. It confirms it, it puts it on a pedestal, it makes it permanent. It shows that it cannot move.
Yeah, because if you have to go to that great length,
Exactly.
there could be no shortcuts. It has to be done to the
Exactly. So, quite contrary to getting rid of the law, it establishes the law. It's like nailing it down and saying that shows that it cannot be moved. So, Sister Mary, you were right. Sister was right. Those 2 points. There was no other way. God is infinite. And we're told that we cannot have any problems that God doesn't have 1,000 ways to solve. Every one of our problems. But guess what? God had only one way to save mankind. And it was through the way that he did it. In other words, sin is of such a horrendous nature that even an infinite God, it left him with no option but one. Only one possibility of defeating it and redeeming mankind. Ramos.
God is a genius.
Yes.
You cannot go heaven without the law. Without allowing Christ to live the life for us.
Okay, when you say we cannot go ahead without the law, we have the law in Christ. In other words, the infinite, perfect righteousness of God, which the law demands, we have that when we're in Christ. And when you're in Christ, guess what? He works it out through you. You're living it. He's writing it on your heart. That is why Paul says in Romans chapter 8, 3 and 4, what the law could not do because of the weakness of the flesh, we are fallen. What the law could not do because of the weakness of the flesh, he says, God sending his own Son in the likeness, the sameness, likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh. And verse 4 says, so that, the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not according to the flesh but the Spirit. So we know we're dealing with sanctification, because that fulfilled in us has to do with that Christian walk. As we are walking not according to the flesh but led by the Spirit, that righteousness of the law is being fulfilled in us. It's being manifested through us. It's being filled up in us. It's being imparted to us. We are growing in grace. We are being sanctified unto perfection. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, put it this way. The saved, the righteous, will have the law in 2 ways. They will have it as an imputed gift and as an imparted experience. You understand? They will have it as a legal declaration and as a personal experience, a moral transformation in that. It's a God.
The law.
Huh?
You said that the law has been imputed and imparted.
Yeah, because Christ perfectly kept the law for us. And as we said earlier, when you believe in him, that his perfect obedience to the law is imputed to you to justify you. And it's imparted to you in the work of sanctification. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, that which God gives us, it's the same righteousness, but he gives us in 2 different ways. He gives us as a legal declaration, which shows his acceptance of us and changes our standing before him. We are no longer criminals condemned, but we are now pardoned and saints, clothed and in his righteousness. And he also gives it to us in our experience. Transformation of heart, renewing of our mind. Same righteousness, just two different modes in which we receive it. One as a personal experience, and one, as an objective part. Sister Joy. Alright. In the context that we're speaking right now, we're dealing with the law as the Ten Commandments, right? But understand, the Jewish mind that follows writing largely too. When they say the law, they look at the law as like the books of Moses, they call it Genesis, Exodus, first five books. So in order the whole system, ceremonial system and all that, they consider that to be the law. I think I gave an experience the other day when some Jewish people down south had asked me to come do a weekend series for them. So they heard a radio program about the law. I was looking at the law and I was looking at the changeless nature of God. That was a series we were doing back a couple years ago. And they wanted to come do the law. So they invite a lot of their Jewish friends. And I went there now, thinking law as within the context of what I was looking at. And they were thinking law within the context of their Passover and all their rites and ceremonies. And they said, we like what we hear you talking about. But I'm saying law and thinking one thing, and they're hearing law and hearing something else. So I went there for the weekend and everything and, presented law. Because that's what they wanted me to pretty much speak around. Other things too, gospel too, but law within the context of the gospel, let's put it that way. But then, afterward, the hosts, I was talking with them afterwards, and they wanted to set up another meeting because they said, I didn't quite give what they wanted to hear. You know what I mean? And that's when it dawned on me. I said, hold it. Law means to them the law of Moses, everything included. You understand? So I had to kind of, there and then, kind of make certain things clear. That look, whatever needed to be made clear, right? So that was that. But you have to understand, law to the Jewish mind means more than just the Ten Commandments. Yeah. When we're speaking here, we're speaking generally. When it's by the works of the law, anything at all. Even, anything at all that you might be doing. For example, if you believe that you have to cover your head with a hat in order for you to be accepted before God, or for your prayer to be accepted before God.
Someone trying to do that.
A lot of people, even in Reformation. If you believe that you have to put a hat on your head in order for God to accept your prayer, hear your prayer, right? That's the work of the law too. Because you're saying that your acceptance before God and His acceptance of you is to some degree dependent upon what you're doing. That's legalism. That's a perversion of the gospel. And in essence, as we're going to say, it's a rejection of Jesus Christ. You understand? Because you're saying that what Christ did is not quite 100%. You have to add something to it. But look, unless we can be, we have to be accepted 100% in the beloved. In other words, based on what He has done, or not at all.
So where does the wearing of the hat then?
That's a different subject.
No, when I use the wearing of the hat,
yeah.
I'm just saying, or anything. Where does that? How does that fit into the
in law?
Into the the old being or the old plan, because it is like
it doesn't fit in.
No, I'm not saying that wearing the hat is like you're saying that if you do not wear the hat, it detracts or takes from your acceptance. So it means then, it's like anybody can say, I can come anyway.
No, you see, there are always two extremes in it.
I can come
You're
anyway.
always, no.
I've heard that and we have
no,
seen
but
that.
understand, the flesh always is seeking for an escape route. You see, the fallen nature will do anything to avoid walking the straight path of the gospel. That's how Satan has messed up mankind. For example, there are two counterfeits. You always have on one extreme legalism, which is, for example, that thing that you have to do that in order to be accepted. You have to do this, you have to do this. What you have to do in order to be, that's legalism. Because you have nothing to do. A man came to Jesus in John 6 and he said to Jesus, Master, what must I do that I may work the works of God? And Jesus said in John 6:29, this is the work of God, that you believe on Him who He has sent. Believing is not just an intellectual assent, as we said earlier. When there is genuine faith, it works. The fruit of faith is genuine obedience. But God doesn't say obey. He says believe. Because He knows that when belief is the genuine article, genuine obedience will flow from it. That's why there's a beautiful statement in the Desire of Ages that Jesus says, which Ellen G. White tells us, Jesus did not tell his disciples to bear fruit. He told them to abide.
Amen.
All right. No, but I'm going to send some research. I don't remember the page, but you're going to show them. These are pages. So, that was that point there. There was a point I was making right there, but I guess I'm getting at it.
So in this context, the law is really, in the proper sense, the law is a 10 commandments. Apart from the heart and everything else, right?
What I'm saying, Sister Joy, is that when we're reading here in Romans, and Paul said, by the works of the law, Paul is talking about, and in chapter 4 he's going to bring it out more clearly. He's talking about any kind of work at all. Any kind of good works. You see, alright, to use law in its broadest sense, right? Let me give you in its broadest sense. Law means, wherever you see do, that's law. Paul always says, love one another. Jesus said, Paul says, do not. When you read all these pieces of Paul in which he's giving instructions for the Christian to do, all of that can come under law because it's an instruction of do, right? The gospel is done. God has done. But understand, the doing can only be genuine when the focus and the whole heart is resting on the done. You understand? So when you're resting on the accomplished fact, the ongoing experience takes place. Notice two things again. There is an accomplished fact. Remember we told about the gospel has to do with the historical account of Jesus Christ, his life, death, and resurrection. What God accomplished in Christ for us. That is the gospel. That's an accomplished fact. Sanctification is the ongoing experience. The basis of the ongoing experience is the accomplished fact. The accomplished fact is the done. The ongoing experience has to do with the writing of the law on your heart. These are instructions that we are admonished to follow. But understand, there are two kinds of people trying to follow them. There's one kind who is out there having rolled up their sleeves, like my sleeves are rolled up right now, muscling up and they're trying to follow them. That works. There's another fact who are looking at the accomplished fact and filling their heart with it and being broken by the love of God as demonstrated in that accomplished work of God in Christ, right? And what do you think is happening as they continue to behold that work? They are being changed. The ongoing experience is taking place. That is God working in them to will and to do according to his good pleasure. You have two kinds of people. Those who are striving to do in order to be accepted, and those who are doing out of love because they know that they have been accepted. So you have two kinds of people in the world. Those who are trying to do in order to be saved, and those who are doing because they know that in Christ they have been saved. Two kinds of people. Which one is working? The former. Those who are trying to do in order to be saved. Which one is working?
Oh, no, I didn't understand. Okay, yeah,
all right.
The first one is working.
Okay.
The first one is working.
All right.
Yeah, that's why I didn't get it
As you think about it, it becomes clear.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Rocky, that hand up.
Yeah.
I was actually bursting to the point.
All right, don't burst.
When the question that Ramos asked, I forgot the question, but I remember what I was trying to say. You gave us an analogy once. Where the accuser, when he stands before us and says, where is, you've done this, you've done that, yada yada, blah blah blah. Where is your record?
Okay.
We don't have to look for ourselves in point.
All right. Somebody, I think I know how to do something. Somebody's actually listening to the Bible for their church. All right. I can remember that. But I said, it's for a long time I gave that kind of knowledge. It's like when you stand before the law, and the law says to you, Raquel, where is that perfect obedience? Huh? Where is it? You can't pass. You can't go through this gate. The law is barring the gate. You can't go through this gate. Look, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all your heart. Where is that perfect obedience? You have violated my precepts. Two kind of people are going to stand here before the Lord. There are those who are going to be looking in themselves and trying to find that perfect. But and there's those going to say, look, get out of my way. I have it. Well, where is it? And just point to Christ. It's right in him. It's right there. He is my perfect obedience. See what I'm saying?
So faith is done and the law is doing. Right?
No. Gospel. The gospel.
The gospel.
Yes.
The gospel is done.
Yes, God's accomplished work. And then the ongoing experience is the work of sanctification, which is God's writing the law on our hearts.
Okay.
All right? All right. Terrence being quiet tonight. Everything clear, Terrence? All right, wonderful. Because I see expression in deep thought, man. I just don't wonder what's going through your head. You're like, deep. Are we clear, Vernon? Everything all right? All right, so we're going to close in prayer. Raquel, you all right? Okay, good. We're going to close in prayer. So let us pray. Ramos to pray for us.
Father, we come before you. Thank you, Father God, once again for giving us this opportunity to come before your throne. Thank you, Father God, for the Holy Spirit, which you show us, Father God, for giving us understanding. Thank you, Father God, for giving us your daily and your need with us, Father God. We ask, Father God, that you give us the power of your faith in you, Father God. Savior. We ask, Father God, that you continue helping us, Lord, to be assured to that those things that is not of you, and the grace of your love, Father God. Help us, Lord, to allow your Holy Spirit to teach us, Lord, that shape us in your perfect things, Father God. And that our life and our work will not be a horse or a door, Father God, that others will see it, and that we will be high-driven and honest, Lord. Thank you, Father God, for finishing the work in each of our hearts. That we don't come faithful, Lord. And we thank you, Father God, for the love towards us. Thank you for spreading the gospel of our souls. Help us, Father God, to not be ashamed to share your songs in the Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. That the words from us, the meditation for us, be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our redeemer. Well, I want to thank you all for coming out. And look forward to seeing you all on Sabbath. God bless. Have a wonderful
They say there's someone for everyone, and I believe it's true. Somewhere someone's looking for someone like me and you. And there's someone in the mirror in the morning when I rise. There are times when she's someone I hardly recognize, but I've got someone I can turn to.